My son left a note on my pillow that said, "Don't plan your future around me or my house." He had been living rent-free in the house I owned for 6 years, while I paid several of his bills, provided the SUV he drove, babysat whenever his wife decided I was available, and quietly lived in the cottage behind them. I read his note twice, folded it neatly, and called my attorney at 7 the next morning. The man who got out of that car was maybe 50, silver at the temples, wearing a golf shirt like he'd been pulled off a Saturday tea time. He didn't look at me. He looked at Belle, and the look on his face wasn't the look of a man arriving to back up his patient's family. It was the look of a man who just realized the water he was standing in went a lot deeper than he'd been told. "Belle," he said, "we need to talk. Now." She turned the color of the for sale sign still leaning against the mailbox post. "Dr. Feld, this isn't a good time. It's never a good time." He finally glanced at me, quick, apologetic in a way that told me everything before he opened his mouth again. "Mrs. Aldrich, I'm Dr. Raymond Feld. I'm a licensed geriatric psychiatrist out of Meridian Behavioral Health. I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly, because my license may depend on it. Did I ever examine you, in person, at any point in the last year?" I set my book down on the porch rail. Behind him, Adrian had gone very still, the way he used to go still as a boy right before he admitted to something. "I've never met you in my life," I said. Dr. Feld closed his eyes for a second, like he'd been hoping for a different answer, even though he clearly already knew this one. Then he turned to Belle. "There's a court investigator named Patricia Nguyen who called my office this morning asking me to produce my clinical notes from Mrs. Aldrich's evaluation. I don't have clinical notes, Belle. I have a phone call you, and I had 11 weeks ago, where you described your mother-in-law's, and I quote, increasing confusion and paranoid accusations, and asked if I could sign off on a standard capacity form as a professional courtesy so you could, in your words, get ahead of a family situation before it got messy. I signed a form for a woman I'd never laid eyes on because you told me it was a formality. You told me she'd already agreed to see a specialist, and this was just paperwork to speed up her intake." "That's not," Belle started. "I have the voicemail," he said. "I kept it, because something about the whole thing felt off, and I've been doing this 11 years, and when something feels off, I record it." He looked back at me. "Mrs. Aldrich, I am so sorry. I'm going to call Ms. Nguyen back within the hour and tell her exactly what I told you. I'm also going to be retaining an attorney of my own because I have a horrible feeling I just signed my name to something that could get me a fraud referral to the state medical board." Nobody said anything for a second. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up. Absurdly ordinary. Adrian finally spoke. "Belle, what is he talking about?" "Adrian, don't. What is he talking about?" I picked my book back up because my hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking, and I said, "I'd start with the word conservatorship, sweetheart. That's the word you're looking for." Dr. Feld got back in his car 11 minutes later. He didn't apologize to Belle again. He apologized to me twice more, gave me his card, and told me to have my attorney call him directly. I stood on my own porch, in front of my own house, and watched my son's face do something I hadn't seen it do since he was 9 years old and got caught lying about a broken window. That particular collapse where the story runs out before the person telling it does. I called Diane Okafor's office at 8:14 that night, even though it wasn't office hours, because Diane had given me her cell number the day I signed the new will and told me plainly, "Camille, if anything moves fast in this situation, you call me, day or night, no apology necessary." Diane had been practicing elder law for 22 years. She had a framed certificate on her wall from the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and a habit of speaking in complete, unhurried sentences, even when the person on the other end of the phone was not unhurried at all. "Tell me everything," she said, slowly. "Start with the doctor," I told her. She was quiet for a long moment when I finished, the kind of quiet that meant she was doing math in her head. "Camille, I need you to hear this clearly. What you're describing isn't a family disagreement anymore. If Belle knowingly misrepresented that phone call to obtain a signed capacity evaluation and used that evaluation to support a guardianship petition, that's fraud on the court. That's potentially a criminal matter, not just a civil one. Tomorrow morning, first thing, I want you to do 3 things. Pull your bank statements for the last 90 days. Pull your credit report. And do not, under any circumstances, sign anything anyone hands you, even if it looks like nothing. I haven't signed anything. Good. Keep it that way. I'm filing an emergency response to the petition first thing tomorrow, and I want to request the court investigator's full file. Patricia Nguyen is good. I've worked with her before. She'll want to talk to you directly. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the word conservatorship sitting in my mouth like a stone I'd swallowed on purpose, just to watch what it did to the room. The bank was where the second thing fell apart. I went in Thursday morning to pull the 90-day statements Diane wanted, and the teller, a young man named Kyle with a name tag, and the that particular gentleness bank employees develop after years of delivering bad news to old women, pulled up my account and frowned at his screen for a second too long. Mrs. Aldrich, I'm showing a home equity line of credit application submitted on the 12th. It's still pending underwriting. Did you want to check on the status of that? I told myself it was nothing. For about 4 seconds. A mistake. A mix-up with a similar name. I didn't apply for a home equity line of credit. Kyle's face did the thing faces do when they realize they're standing in the middle of something bigger than a routine transaction. He turned the screen around, and there it was. My name, my property address, a loan amount of $84,000, an electronic signature dated the 12th, 11 days before the note on my pillow. My hands started shaking on the counter, and I put them flat against the marble so Kyle wouldn't see. Ma'am, I'm going to need to flag this account and get my branch manager. If this wasn't you, we're looking at identity theft, and I have to walk you through a formal dispute process. The branch manager, a composed woman named Renata Ibarra, sat with me for 40 minutes. The electronic signature had been submitted from an IP address that traced eventually to a residential internet connection registered under Adrian's name, my son's Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi I'd stopped paying for 4 days earlier, which meant somebody had applied for $84,000 against my house using my identity before I'd even cut the cord. I called Diane from the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off, and for the first time in this whole ugly stretch of days, my voice cracked when I talked. They tried to take out a loan on my house, I said. $84,000. In my name. Okay, Diane said, and I could hear her pen already moving. Okay, Camille, this is now, unambiguously, a police matter. I want you to file a report today, and I'm going to give you a name. Detective Lorraine Vance, Financial Crimes Against the Elderly Unit. 15 years on the force. The last 6 specifically working elder fraud. She's sharp and she moves fast when there's documentation, and you have documentation. I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes before I could make myself drive. Detective Vance had a handshake like she meant it, and a way of writing in a small spiral notebook that made you feel like everything you said actually mattered, which, it turned out, in her line of work, it usually did. Start from the barbecue, she said, when we sat down at her desk on Friday afternoon. Diane gave me the broad strokes. I want the granular version. Every date you can remember, every text, every document. People like this leave trails, Mrs. Aldrich, because they never think anyone's going to look. I gave her the note, photographed and dated. I gave her the petition Diane had pulled from the county system. I gave her the bank's fraud packet. She read through it with the specific, unhurried thoroughness of somebody who had seen this exact pattern before and knew precisely where the seams usually split. Here's what I'm seeing, she said, tapping the petition. This is a 2-pronged play. Prong 1, get you declared incapacitated so somebody else controls your finances and your property. Prong 2, she flipped to the loan application. Extract cash out of the house before anyone official is watching closely enough to ask why. That loan wasn't going toward your care, Mrs. Aldrich. $84,000 doesn't cover a caretaker. It covers a down payment on somewhere else, or it covers debt somebody doesn't want you to know about. Belle doesn't have $84,000 of debt that I know of. You'd be surprised what people don't tell their mothers-in-law. She closed the notebook. I'm going to need financial records. Yours, and with a warrant, theirs. I'm also going to want to know about that for sale sign your attorney mentioned. Because if there's a listing agreement out there with your signature on it, and you didn't sign it, we're looking at forgery on top of everything else, and forgery is where this stops being a family mess and starts being a felony. I drove to the real estate office that afternoon instead of going home. I told myself I was just going to ask a question. I ended up sitting across from an agent named Priya Anand. No relation, as it turned out, to the forensic document examiner I'd hire 3 days later with the exact same first name, which felt like a strange, small joke the universe was playing on me during the worst week of my adult life, who pulled up the listing on her screen without hesitation, because as far as she knew, she was talking to the seller. You're all set for Thursday's closing, she said. Buyers already got the earnest money down, inspections waived. It's about as clean as these things get. Your daughter-in-law said you'd be handling everything through her power of attorney since you're not local for signings, which happens more than you'd think with elderly sellers. I'm sitting right in front of you, I said. I am extremely local. Priya's smile faltered in real time. I'm sorry. I'm the seller. Or I would be if I'd agreed to sell anything, which I have not. Can I see that power of attorney? She turned the screen. There it was. Or I would be if I'd agreed to sell anything, which I have not. Can I see that power of attorney? She turned the screen. There it was. Notarized. Dated 3 weeks earlier. My signature at the bottom in a hand that was close. Close enough to fool a stranger. But wrong in the way a forgery is always wrong to the person whose hand it's imitating. My Please don't loop like that. They haven't looped like that since 1987. That's not my signature, I said. And I've never met the notary whose stamp is on that page. The buyer, according to the file, was a limited liability company called Fern Hollow Holdings, registered 4 months earlier, with a single listed member, a man named Corbin Hale, Belle's cousin. The closing was scheduled for Thursday. It was Friday when I sat in that office. I had 6 days. Diane hired the forensic examiner, Priya Anand, the second one, certified through the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, that same afternoon, and paid a rush fee to have her compare the notarized signature against a decade of my genuine ones. My old driver's license renewals, my late husband's estate paperwork, 3 years of tax filings. Priya Anand called Monday morning with results that used words like inconsistent pen pressure and unnatural letter formation consistent with traced or copied signature, and eventually the word that mattered most in a courtroom, forgery, to a reasonable degree of professional certainty. I tried one more time to fix this the ordinary way before it became the extraordinary way. I drove to the house Monday evening and asked Adrian to sit with me at the kitchen table that used to be my kitchen table, in the house that was still, on paper and in every way that counted, mine. I need you to tell me what you knew, I said. Not what Belle did, what you knew. He wouldn't look at me. He picked at a chip in the table's edge, the same nervous habit he'd had since he was 7. I knew she was talking to a lawyer about options. I didn't know about the loan. I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know about the loan. Did you know about the power of attorney? A pause that told me everything the words after it tried to walk back. She said it was just precautionary, in case you got sick and we needed to move fast on medical stuff. Adrian, I never signed a power of attorney. He finally looked up, and for 1 second, I saw my son again, underneath 6 years of somebody else's architecture. Then Belle's voice cut through from the hallway. Adrian, don't talk to her without me in the room. And he closed back up like a door somebody had oiled shut. That was the failed attempt. I left without another word because there wasn't one left to try. Belle texted me twice that night. The first one came at 9:40, and it was almost sweet, in the way she used to be sweet the first year, back before I understood that her warmth had an invoice attached. I know things have been tense. Can we just talk woman to woman? I think there's been a huge misunderstanding, and I don't want Theo growing up in a broken family. I looked at that message for a long time before I understood what it actually was. Not an olive branch, but a reconnaissance mission, checking whether the forgery findings had rattled me enough to make a deal before Wednesday's hearing could happen at all. I didn't answer. At 11:52, the second text came, and this one didn't bother with the woman-to-woman voice anymore. Fine. Keep hiding behind lawyers. See how much access you get to your grandson once a judge hears how you've been harassing this family for months. I read it twice, the same way I'd read the note on my pillow 8 days earlier, and I felt something in me go still and clear, the way water goes still and clear right before it freezes solid enough to hold weight. I forwarded both messages to Diane without comment. She wrote back one line. Good. Threatening grandchild access as leverage during active litigation plays very badly in front of a judge. Save everything. Tuesday, an eviction notice showed up taped to my cottage door, not the main house, my cottage. 3 days notice to vacate, citing a lease violation I'd never agreed to, signed by a property management company I'd never heard of, on letterhead listing Belle as authorized agent for the owner. I stood on my own porch reading a notice ordering me out of my own home, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold, the particular calm that comes right before a person stops being afraid and starts being dangerous in the useful sense of the word. I photographed it. I texted it to Diane and Detective Vance in the same message. No caption necessary. Diane called within the hour. That notice is void on its face. You're the title holder. You can't evict yourself, and no property management company has authority over a property they don't manage. But Camille, I need you to understand what this tells us. They're not slowing down. If anything, they're accelerating, because somewhere in the last week, they figured out we're onto them, and now it's a race. A race to what? To Thursday's closing, to the emergency guardianship hearing, which just got scheduled for Wednesday morning. Ex parte, meaning Belle's attorney requested it without you present, arguing urgency based on your, quote, rapidly deteriorating capacity and immediate risk of financial exploitation by unknown parties. I actually laughed. One short, ugly bark of a sound. She's accusing me of exploiting myself. She's accusing you of being exploited by strangers so that a judge grants emergency temporary guardianship to her before anyone digs deep enough to find what we've already found. If that hearing happens Wednesday and the judge doesn't have our evidence in front of him, Camille, he could grant it. Temporary guardians get real power fast. Bank freezes, medical decision authority, control of the property, and unwinding it afterward, even once we prove fraud, takes months, maybe longer. I am not going to let that happen, but I need everything, and I need it by tomorrow morning. I had roughly 18 hours. Patricia Nguyen called me at 4:15 that afternoon. She was the court investigator assigned to the guardianship case. 12 years doing exactly this kind of work, and she had the flat, careful voice of someone who had learned not to react out loud to anything a family told her, no matter how strange. Mrs. Aldrich, I want to be transparent with you. My job isn't to be on anyone's side. It's to walk into that courtroom Wednesday and tell Judge Simmons what I actually found. And right now what I've found doesn't match the petition at all. I spoke with Dr. Feld this morning. I pulled the loan application. I want to ask you a few questions directly, if you're willing, so my report reflects your voice and not just paperwork. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked about my daily routine, my finances, my medications. I take one for blood pressure, and I told her so. My memory, my decision-making, whether I'd ever, at any point, agreed to see a psychiatrist for a capacity evaluation. I answered every question plainly, because I had nothing to hide, and for the first time in 8 days, somebody in a position of real institutional power was asking me instead of asking about me. Off the record, she said near the end. In 12 years, I have seen maybe 4 cases with this much documented, provable fraud behind the petition. Most of these are messier, genuine disagreements about genuine decline, families who love each other badly instead of well. This isn't that. I'll have my report to the court by tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep that night, not one honest minute of it. I sat at my kitchen table in the cottage. My kitchen table, my cottage. Words I found myself repeating like a woman counting rosary beads. Surrounded by manila folders Diane's paralegal had messengered over at 10 p.m. The forged power of attorney, Priya Anand's forensic report, the loan application with its damning IP address, the fraudulent capacity evaluation, Dr. Feld's signed affidavit, the eviction notice, the listing agreement, screenshots of 6 years of unpaid utility auto pays I'd covered without complaint, and a printout of the barbecue photo somebody's neighbor had taken and, mercifully, kept, showing my wrought iron chairs sitting in Belle's yard 3 weeks before she filed to have me declared incompetent. At 1:40 a.m., my phone buzzed. Detective Vance. Can't sleep either? No. Good news, of a kind. We got a warrant executed on Belle's financials tonight. That $84,000 loan wasn't going toward your care like I figured. Fern Hollow Holdings and the LLC buying your house has an outstanding debt to a hard money lender, personally guaranteed by Corbin Hale, due in 9 days. The loan on your house was supposed to cover half the shortfall on a flip that already went bad on a different property. They needed your equity, Mrs. Aldrich. Not your safety, your equity. I sat with that for a long moment, the specific arithmetic of it. $84,000, a number cold enough to explain a warm July note left on a pillow. Wednesday's hearing, I said. Will you be there? I'll be there. So will Nguyen, the court investigator. So will Dr. Feld, if Diane subpoenas him, which she should. Get some rest if you can, Mrs. Aldrich. Tomorrow's going to be long. I didn't rest. I sat with the folders until the sky outside the cottage window went from black to the particular gray of a morning that's about to demand everything of you. And at 6 a.m., I put on the navy suit I'd bought for my husband's funeral 9 years earlier and hadn't worn since, because some part of me understood, even exhausted and furious and running on nothing but black coffee and adrenaline, that I needed to walk into that courtroom looking like exactly what I was, a woman entirely in possession of herself. Judge Harriet Simmons had a courtroom that ran on time and patience in roughly equal limited supply. She was maybe 60, silver bob, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she looked at the emergency guardianship petition in front of her the way a woman looks at a form letter she's read 400 times before, until Diane stood up. Your Honor, before we proceed on the petitioner's motion, the respondent has filed an emergency response with substantial supporting documentation that I believe fundamentally changes the posture of this hearing. Belle's attorney, a young man who looked like he'd taken this case because it seemed simple, objected that this was irregular. Judge Simmons looked at him over her glasses. Counsel, your client is asking me to strip a 67-year-old woman of her legal autonomy on an emergency basis, without her being present to defend herself, which I only agreed to review today because you represented it as urgent and uncontested. If the respondent has evidence that contradicts urgency, I am going to look at it. Sit down. Diane walked the court through it in the order that mattered most, not the order things had happened, because she understood, she told me later, that a judge needed the fraud first, and the family drama second. Or the family drama would swallow the fraud whole, and this would just look like a nasty divorce-adjacent squabble instead of what it actually was. Exhibit A, the forged power of attorney. Exhibit B, Priya Anand's forensic report. Read into the record in full. Exhibit C, Exhibit B, Priya Anand's forensic report. Read into the record in full. Exhibit C, the capacity evaluation. And then Dr. Feld, who Diane had subpoenaed Monday night and who showed up Wednesday morning in a suit instead of a golf shirt, testified under oath that he had never examined me, that his signature had been obtained through what he now believed to be deliberate misrepresentation, and that he had already self-reported the incident to the state medical board, rather than wait to be caught. Belle's face, through all of this, did something I will remember for the rest of my life. It didn't crumble all at once. It came apart in stages, the way ice breaks on a lake, a crack, a pause, another crack, and then the whole surface giving way at once. By the time Detective Vance took the stand and testified about the loan application, the IP address, and Fern Hollow Holdings' desperate, ticking clock debt to a hard money lender, Belle had stopped looking at the judge entirely and started looking at Adrian, who was sitting 3 rows behind her instead of beside her, which told me he'd made a decision sometime in the last 18 hours that he hadn't told either of us about yet. "Mrs. Aldrich," Judge Simmons said, when it was finally my turn, "is there anything you'd like to add?" I stood, and my hands, for the first time in 8 days, were steady. "Your Honor, 6 years ago I gave my son and his wife a home, rent-free, because I love my son, and I wanted to meet my grandson somewhere he'd feel safe. I paid their bills. I gave them a car. I asked for nothing back except to be treated like a person whose life still belonged to her. 11 days before I found a note on my pillow telling me not to plan my future around my own house, my daughter-in-law had already filed paperwork to take that future away from me entirely. I'm not here because I'm incapable of managing my affairs. I'm here because I managed them well enough to notice when somebody tried to steal them." Judge Simmons was quiet for a moment. Then she took her glasses off entirely, which Diane told me afterward was, in 20 years of practicing in front of her, a thing she'd only ever seen happen when Judge Simmons was genuinely angry. "This petition is dismissed with prejudice," she said. "I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges, including but not limited to forgery, attempted grand theft, and fraud upon this court, which I consider a particularly serious offense given that it was directed at exploiting an elderly petitioner's legal protections against her. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order barring the petitioner from the respondent's property, effective immediately, and I am voiding, in full, the power of attorney, the loan application, and the pending sale of the respondent's property to Fern Hollow Holdings. Detective, I trust you'll be following up." "Yes, Your Honor." Patricia Nguyen's report, entered as Exhibit G, was 2 pages long and said, in language far more restrained than mine, essentially the same thing I'd said on the stand. No evidence of cognitive decline, no evidence of confusion, no evidence of anything except an elderly woman who had noticed, correctly and in real time, that she was being robbed. Judge Simmons read it twice before she set it down, which told me she wasn't a woman who took anyone's word for anything, including a court investigator she'd clearly worked with for years. Belle was arrested in the courthouse parking lot 40 minutes later. Detective Vance called it efficient, which I understood by then was about as close to satisfaction as her job ever let her get out loud. I watched from the top of the steps as they walked her to the car, and I want to say I felt triumphant, the way you're supposed to feel in the stories. Mostly I felt tired and a little sick, the way you feel after a fever finally breaks, and your body remembers it has other things to do besides fight. Adrian found me on the courthouse steps. He looked like a man who'd aged 5 years and 8 days, which I suppose he had. "Mom," his voice cracked on the single syllable. "I filed for separation this morning, before the hearing. I didn't know about the loan, I swear to you I didn't. But I knew enough. I knew about the power of attorney conversation. I knew she'd talk to a lawyer, and I let myself not ask the questions because asking would have meant admitting what she'd become, what we'd let ourselves become. I'm not asking you to forgive that today. I just needed you to know I finally did the math." I looked at my son standing on those steps, and I thought about the wrought iron chairs, and the writing desk, and 6 years of silence dressed up as loyalty. And I thought, too, about a boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms because he trusted, absolutely, that nothing bad could happen to him as long as I was the one holding on. The math was always there, Adrian. You just finally opened your eyes to read it. Can I see Theo? Can you see Theo? I don't want him caught in the middle of what she's about to face. He's my grandson. That was never in question. It was never on the table until she put it there. He nodded, and something in his shoulders came down half an inch, the first small mercy either of us had allowed the other in 8 days. Belle was charged 11 days later with forgery of a legal document, attempted grand theft by fraud, and identity theft, the last of which carried, according to Diane, a mandatory minimum given the amount involved. She lost her job at the marketing firm where she'd worked for 4 years. Companies, it turns out, do not love employing people who are actively facing felony fraud charges involving forged notarizations. Corbin Hales LLC collapsed under its own hard money debt within the month, and the buyer, who'd been so ready to close on my house without an inspection, vanished into whatever hole people like that vanish into. Dr. Feld's medical board review was ongoing last I heard, though his lawyer had negotiated it down from a fraud referral to a professional conduct review on the strength of the fact that he'd self-reported before anyone forced him to. I changed the will back exactly once, not to put Adrian's name where it had been, not yet, but to add a clause his own attorney, oddly enough, suggested during the separation proceedings. A trust for Theo, administered by Diane's firm, untouchable by either parent, growing quietly in the background of whatever came next for all of us. It's been 10 months. The cottage smells like the lavender I finally got around to planting along the path, The path Belle used to complain blocked her preferred parking spot for the SUV that isn't hers anymore either. My mother's writing desk is still gone. Some things once taken don't come back. And I've made a kind of peace with that the way you make peace with a scar. I bought a new one instead. Cheaper, less history, more mine. Adrian comes by on Sundays now with Theo, who is 4 and has strong opinions about dinosaurs, and absolutely no idea how close he came to growing up as a pawn in somebody else's foreclosure scheme. We don't talk about Belle much. There's a criminal trial pending, and Diane tells me the DA's office thinks they have more than enough to secure a conviction. And some days that thought sits in my stomach like justice, and other days it just sits there like wait, and I've stopped expecting it to only ever feel like one or the other. I sold the main house eventually, not to Fern Hollow Holdings, not to any cousin's shell company, but to a retired school teacher and her husband who paid full asking price and cried a little in the driveway when I handed them the keys, because it turned out to be exactly the kind of forever house they'd been looking for. I kept the cottage. I kept the garden. I kept, against every reasonable expectation, 8 days of hell should have burned out of me, my son, in whatever damaged, rebuilding shape our relationship is currently taking. Someone asked me recently, a woman at my grief support group who'd heard the short version of the story secondhand, whether I regretted rewriting that will so fast, whether it felt like an overreaction to a note that, on its face, was just an unkind sentence from a tired daughter-in-law. I told her the note was never the problem. The note was just the first time somebody let me see, in writing, what they'd already decided about me in private. They wanted me to stop planning my future around them, so I did. I just didn't plan the version they were expecting.